The crystal clinked, a sound far too delicate for the undercurrent of tension thrumming in the private dining room of l'Orangerie. It was Liam's parents' favorite haunt, a place where a single amuse-bouche probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I smoothed down the fabric of my dress, a tasteful, second-hand navy sheath I'd spent weeks hunting for, and tried to project an aura of calm I was miles away from feeling. This was it, the rehearsal dinner. Tomorrow, I'd be marrying Liam, the love of my life. Tonight, I had to survive his family. Liam squeezed my hand under the heavy linen tablecloth, his warm smile a small beacon in the opulent gloom. He knew. He knew his sister Chloe could be a challenge. Challenge was Liam's diplomatic term. I preferred a finely tuned instrument of social torture. Chloe, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than my car, if I still had one, was holding court at the other end of the long mahogany table. Her voice, sharp and carrying, sliced through the polite murmurs. She'd been subtly, and not so subtly, jabbing at me all evening. Little comments about my quaint apartment, my interesting career choice, freelance writer, which in her world translated to unemployed and delusional, and my sensible fashion. Each remark was a tiny paper cut, insignificant on its own, but collectively they were starting to bleed. "It's just so wonderful that Liam has found someone so grounded," Chloe was saying, her eyes flicking to me, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Not everyone is obsessed with material things, are they, Sarah? It must be so freeing to not worry about, investments or portfolios or affording things." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went around their side of the table. Liam's parents, Richard and Eleanor, offered weak, placating smiles in my direction. They were wealthy, yes, but generally kind, if a little out of touch. Chloe, however, seemed to have inherited the entitlement gene with a vengeance, and none of the diplomacy. I forced a smile. "I focus on what's important, Chloe, and right now, that's marrying your wonderful brother." "Oh, absolutely," she chirped, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. "And it's so admirable how you're managing, darling. Liam mentioned you're budgeting quite strictly for the honeymoon. So resourceful. Most brides would be devastated not to have that 10-day Maldivian escape he originally planned, but a cozy cottage in Cornwall is lovely too, I'm sure, very authentic." My cheeks burned. The Maldives trip had been a dream, but after a major client unexpectedly folded, leaving me with a significant unpaid invoice, my contribution to the honeymoon fund had dwindled to almost nothing. Liam, bless him, had immediately suggested scaling back, assuring me it didn't matter where we were, as long as we were together. But Chloe, naturally, had sniffed out the financial strain like a bloodhound. "We're very much looking forward to Cornwall," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "It's beautiful, and we'll have a wonderful time." Liam interjected, "It's going to be perfect, Chloe. We both love the coast, and it'll be much more intimate." Chloe waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Of course. It's just, well, one does wonder. Marriage is a partnership, isn't it? Financially speaking, too. It's a bit traditional, shall we say, for the bride to bring so little to the table in this day and age. But I'm sure your little writing projects will pick up eventually, Sarah. Maybe you could write a blog about thrifty living? The air crackled. Even Liam's usually unflappable parents looked uneasy. Richard cleared his throat, about to intervene, but Chloe was on a roll, emboldened by my silence. This wasn't the first time. For months, ever since Liam and I got engaged, Chloe had made my financial situation her pet project. My earnings as a freelance writer were variable. Some months were great, others, like the recent ones, were lean. I'd been pouring every spare moment and penny into my novel, a historical fiction piece I'd been meticulously researching and writing for 3 years. It was my passion, my dream, but it wasn't paying the bills yet. Liam knew about the novel, was my biggest cheerleader, but we'd kept it quiet from his family. It felt too vulnerable, too precious to expose to Chloe's casual cruelty. "I mean," Chloe continued, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "it must be quite a pressure on Liam, being the sole provider for such an ambitious lifestyle. Weddings, honeymoons, starting a life together. These things cost, darling. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Perhaps you could take up a little side hustle. Some copywriting for local businesses. Every little helps, doesn't it? That was it. The condescension. The public shaming. The implication that I was some sort of gold-digging freeloader. Something inside me, worn thin by months of her barbs and the stress of wedding planning on a shoestring budget, finally snapped. A strange calm washed over me. I'd been checking my emails obsessively for the past week, ever since my agent, Brenda, had told me there was serious interest from a major publishing house. Just before we'd left for the restaurant, an email had pinged on my phone. The subject line had made my heart leap. Offer, the Crimson Quill, Penguin Random House. I hadn't even dared to open it properly, just glimpsed the sender and subject, terrified of jinxing it or getting my hopes up, saving the full reveal for a private moment. But this was a moment. I picked up my clutch, my movements deliberate. Liam looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I've got this. Actually, Chloe, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, even cool. I opened my clutch and pulled out my phone. The table fell silent. All eyes were on me. Speaking of my little writing projects, I tapped the screen, my fingers surprisingly steady. The Wi-Fi in L'Orangerie was, thankfully, robust. The email opened, my breath hitched. I scanned the first few lines, and then the crucial paragraph. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear this time, but with a wild, soaring elation. I looked up, meeting Chloe's smug, expectant gaze. It seems one of them just picked up rather significantly. I angled my phone screen so Chloe, and indeed most of the table, could see it. I scrolled slowly, deliberately, past the pleasantries, to the figure that leaped off the screen. This is an email from my literary agent, Brenda Maxwell, I announced, my voice clear and carrying, just like Chloe's. It's an offer from Penguin Random House for my debut novel, The Crimson Quill. They're offering a 2-book deal. The advance for the first book, I paused, letting the anticipation hang in the air, savoring the slow dawning of confusion on Chloe's face, is $250,000. Silence. A thick, profound, absolute silence descended upon the table. You could have heard a dust mote land on the plush carpet. Chloe's jaw, which had been set in a smirk, slowly unhinged. Her perfectly applied lipstick seemed to crack. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a mask. Liam, next to me, let out a choked sound, a cross between a gasp and a laugh. He grabbed my arm. Sarah, are you serious? $250,000? I nodded, a slow, triumphant smile finally breaking free. And that's just the advance for the first book, Liam. There's a second one in the deal. Richard, Liam's father, was the first to find his voice, albeit a shaky one. Penguin Random House? That's astounding, Sarah. Congratulations, truly. Eleanor, his mother, echoed him, her eyes wide with genuine surprise and, I thought, a touch of awe. Oh, my dear, a novelist. How absolutely wonderful. We had no idea. Chloe was still mute, her eyes glued to my phone screen as if it were displaying an alien artifact. Her friends, who had been snickering along with her earlier, now looked deeply uncomfortable, their gazes darting between me, Chloe, and my phone. I turned the phone slightly more towards Chloe. You were saying something about thrifty living, Chloe, and side hustles? I suppose this counts as a rather significant side hustle, wouldn't you agree? My voice was sweet, dangerously so. And as for bringing something to the table, I think this might just cover my share of the honeymoon. Perhaps we could even reconsider the Maldives after all, Liam. I winked at my fiancé, who was now beaming, his eyes shining with pride and unshed tears. Maldives, Mauritius, the moon, wherever you want, love. Liam exclaimed, pulling me into a hug right there at the table. I knew it. I knew your book was brilliant, I told you. The atmosphere in the room had undergone a seismic shift. The awkward tension was still there, but now it was centered entirely on Chloe. She looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. Her face was a mottled canvas of shock, disbelief, and dawning humiliation. I gently disengaged from Liam's embrace, though I kept his hand tightly in mine. I looked directly at Chloe. The silence from her end of the table was deafening. Her friends were now studiously examining their bread plates. "You know, Chloe," I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "For months, you've made it your business to comment on my finances, my career, my perceived lack of contribution. You've belittled my work, my ambitions, and frankly, you've been incredibly unkind." Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it again. No witty retort came. No scathing comeback. Just a raw, stunned silence. "Writing is not a little project for me," I continued. "It's my passion, my profession. I've poured years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and immense effort into my novel. I chose not to broadcast my progress because it was personal, and frankly, I didn't feel the need to justify my life choices to you." Liam's father cleared his throat again. "Chloe, I think perhaps an apology might be in order." His voice was stern, a tone I hadn't heard from him before. Chloe blinked, as if waking from a trance. She looked at her father, then at me, then back at her father. A flicker of her old arrogance tried to reassert itself, but it faltered under the weight of the room's collective gaze. I was just teasing," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. It was a pathetic defense, and everyone knew it. "Teasing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Chloe, there's a difference between playful teasing among friends and systematically trying to demean someone you barely know, especially in front of people whose opinions they might value. What you've been doing is bullying, plain and simple, and you chose to do it tonight, of all nights, in a particularly public and cruel way." Liam squeezed my hand. "She's right, Chloe. You've been way out of line, not just tonight, but for a long time." Eleanor, looking mortified, added, "Your father and I are very disappointed in your behavior, Chloe. This is not how we raised you to treat people, especially family." Chloe's face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of a sophisticated, untouchable ice queen shattered, revealing something small and surprisingly fragile underneath. For a fleeting second, I almost felt a sliver of pity for her, but it was quickly eclipsed by the lingering sting of her earlier words and the sheer, unadulterated joy of my news. She pushed her chair back abruptly, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. I need some air," she stammered, her voice thick. Without another word, she practically fled the room, her designer dress swishing behind her. Her posse of friends exchanged awkward glances, then, one by one, mumbled excuses and followed her out, leaving a conspicuous void at their end of the table. An uncomfortable silence lingered for a moment before Richard broke it. "Well," he said, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of parental exasperation. He then turned to me, a genuine smile lighting his face. "Sarah, please, forgive Chloe's appalling manners. Your news is simply thrilling. A novelist in the family. And such a successful one, right out of the gate. We are incredibly proud to welcome you, and frankly, very impressed." Eleanor was already peppering me with questions. "What's the book about, dear? Historical fiction, you said. How fascinating. You must tell us everything. When will it be published? Will there be a launch party?" The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of excited chatter, congratulations, and genuine warmth. The cloud of Chloe's negativity had lifted, replaced by an atmosphere of celebration. Liam was practically vibrating with pride beside me, his arm draped protectively around my shoulders. He kept looking at me with an expression of such love and admiration that it made my heart swell. Later, as Liam and I walked out of l'Orangerie into the cool night air, leaving his parents to handle the bill and the remnants of Chloe's social implosion, he pulled me close. "You, Sarah Jenkins, are absolutely incredible," he whispered, kissing my forehead. "That was the classiest, most epic takedown I have ever witnessed. And a 250 book deal. My fiancé, the literary superstar." I laughed, leaning my head on his shoulder. "It doesn't feel real yet. The deal, I mean." Chloe felt very real. "She got what she deserved," Liam said, his voice firm. "She's been awful to you. I've tried talking to her but, well, you saw. Maybe this will finally make her think." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't holding my breath. Some people are resistant to learning, even when faced with irrefutable evidence of their own foolishness. "But who cares about Chloe right now?" Liam grinned, pulling me to a stop under a street lamp. "We have $250,000 to celebrate, and a wedding tomorrow, and a honeymoon that just got a serious upgrade if you want it. I looked up at him, my heart overflowing. The only upgrade I ever needed was you, Liam. But, I added, a mischievous glint in my eye, I wouldn't say no to browsing some Maldivian resort brochures, just for fun, of course. He laughed, a joyous, carefree sound that echoed in the quiet street. Of course, for fun. The wedding day was beautiful, everything I'd ever dreamed of, made even more special by the lingering glow of the previous night's events. Chloe was subdued, almost eerily quiet. She offered a stilted, formal apology before the ceremony, which I accepted with grace, though I doubted its sincerity. Her parents, however, were effusive in their warmth and repeatedly expressed their excitement about my book. Many of the wedding guests had heard whispers of the incident and the big book deal, and there was a new undercurrent of respect, even awe, in how they interacted with me. The little freelance writer had suddenly become a person of interest, a success story. It was amusing, in a way, how a dollar figure could so drastically alter perception. But what mattered most was Liam's unwavering support, his pride, and the knowledge that I had stood up for myself, using not anger or bitterness, but the undeniable truth of my own hard-earned success. As Liam and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, sunlight streaming through the venue windows, he leaned in and whispered, "So, Mrs. Hughes, author extraordinaire, any regrets about last night?" I smiled, thinking of Chloe's stunned face, the collective gasp, the sheer, sweet vindication. Not a single one. I whispered back, though I do think the speechless rehearsal dinner might make a great title for my second book. Liam threw back his head and laughed, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning of our incredible story. And it was a story I was more than equipped to write. The aftermath of the reveal, as Liam and I privately dubbed it, continued to ripple through the family dynamic for weeks. Chloe remained distant, her pride clearly wounded. She communicated mostly through clipped texts or relayed messages via her mother. There was a palpable sense of her struggling to reconcile the image she'd cultivated of me, the struggling, slightly pathetic charity case, with the reality of a woman who had just landed a life-changing career achievement. Eleanor, on the other hand, became my unexpected champion. She called frequently, asking about the editing process, marketing plans, and eagerly awaiting the first proofs. She even started reading historical fiction, wanting to understand my genre better. Richard, in his quieter way, expressed his admiration by sending me a beautiful antique fountain pen for future masterpieces. It was a touching gesture that spoke volumes. The Cornwall cottage was indeed lovely for our honeymoon, a cozy, windswept haven where we spent 2 weeks blissfully disconnected, walking coastal paths, eating fish and chips, and dreaming about the future. We did, however, spend one rainy afternoon gleefully browsing luxury Maldivian resorts online, just because we could. The power of that "because we could" was intoxicating. It wasn't about the money itself, but the freedom and validation it represented. My agent, Brenda, was ecstatic, of course. "Best rehearsal, dinner, story, ever," she'd shriek down the phone when I recounted the tale. The publishing house was thrilled too, and the initial buzz around the Crimson Quill began to build. There were meetings with editors, cover designers, and marketing teams. It was a whirlwind, a completely new world opening up. A few months after the wedding, Penguin Random House threw a small pre-launch party for a few of their debut authors. Liam and I attended, and I invited his parents. Eleanor was as excited as if it were her own book being celebrated. Richard looked on with quiet pride. Chloe, surprisingly, also came, dragged along by her mother. She was different, still impeccably dressed, still carrying an air of aloofness, but the sharp, condescending edge was noticeably blunted. She approached me at one point while I was chatting with my editor. "Sarah," she said, her voice low. "Chloe," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your book, Mum showed me an early promotional copy. The cover looks impressive." "Thank you," I said. "The designers did a great job." An awkward pause. "So," she fiddled with her clutch, "it's actually like a real book. People will buy it." It wasn't an apology, not really, but for Chloe it was monumental. It was an admission, however grudging, that my little project was, in fact, a tangible achievement. "Yes, Chloe," I said gently, "that's the plan." She nodded, then mumbled something about needing to find the canapés and drifted away. It wasn't a reconciliation, but perhaps it was the first tiny crack in the wall of her prejudice. Liam, who had witnessed the exchange from a short distance, came over and put his arm around me. "Progress?" he whispered. "Baby steps," I replied, smiling. "Glacial, microscopic baby steps." The book launched to fantastic reviews and, to my utter astonishment, quickly climbed the bestseller lists. The 250 advance, which had seemed like an impossibly vast sum, suddenly felt like a savvy investment on the publisher's part. My life transformed. There were interviews, book signings, literary festivals. I was no longer just Sarah, the freelance writer. I was Sarah Jenkins, best-selling author. With the success came financial stability I'd only ever dreamed of. We bought a small house with a garden and a dedicated writing studio for me. Liam continued to thrive in his own career, immensely proud and never once intimidated by my sudden success. He was, as he'd always been, my rock and my biggest fan. The dynamic with Chloe, slowly, almost imperceptibly, continued to shift. She never became my best friend, or even a particularly warm acquaintance, but the open disdain vanished. It was replaced by a kind of wary respect, the kind one might afford a distant, slightly unpredictable, but undeniably successful relative. She stopped making comments about my finances, or anyone else's for that matter. Perhaps seeing her own words so spectacularly backfire had taught her a modicum of caution. One Christmas, about 2 years after the infamous rehearsal dinner, we were all gathered at Liam's parents' house. Chloe, now married herself to a perfectly nice, if somewhat bewildered, financier, was showing everyone photos of her own recent, very lavish, Maldivian honeymoon. She flicked through the images on her phone: turquoise waters, overwater bungalows, sunset cruises. It was divine, she declared, though with a little less of her former bombast. She then looked across at me, a strange expression on her face. "You know, Sarah, we actually saw your book in the airport bookstore in Malé. Front display." I smiled. "Oh, that's nice to hear." "Yes," she said, then paused. I actually bought a copy. For a beach read." Liam, beside me, choked on his mulled wine. Eleanor beamed. Richard chuckled. Chloe looked slightly flustered. It was quite good, actually. I didn't expect to like all the historical stuff, but it was engaging. Coming from Chloe, this was the equivalent of a 5-star review and a heartfelt apology rolled into one. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, Chloe," I said, my smile genuine. Later that evening, as Liam and I were getting ready to leave, he pulled me aside. "Did you hear that? She bought your book. And liked it. The world might actually be ending." I laughed. Or maybe, just maybe, people can change. Even if it takes a 250 book deal email flashed in their face at a rehearsal dinner to kickstart the process. He shook his head, still marveling. "You're a miracle worker, Sarah, in more ways than one." And as we drove home, through the softly falling snow, I thought about that night. The humiliation Chloe had tried to inflict, the quiet desperation I'd felt, and then the sudden, exhilarating flip of the script. It wasn't just about the money, or the book deal, or even about putting Chloe in her place. It was about finding my voice, owning my worth, and refusing to let anyone else define me or my dreams. The speechless faces around that rehearsal dinner table were just a satisfying bonus. The real victory was the story I was now living, a story I had written myself, on my own terms, and it was far from over.